That night, the corridors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry were covered in whispers. No matter the weather or hour, those who lived within the walls of the castle were victims of the news, and it arrived at the most unprecedented of times, for the students of Hogwarts School were preparing to go home for summer holiday when Myrtle Warren of Ravenclaw was murdered. The day had begun with sunshine and mist, a summer that brought in warmth and spread it throughout the premises, starting at Hogsmeade and moving inwards towards the rocks and hills that supported the enormous castle. Students all around the school trotted along to the Great Hall for breakfast. Their joy at having finished their final exams was visible on their faces. All was well within the warmth and comfort at Hogwarts, and all were well beneath their heavy cloaks bearing house colours and interacting with flitting ghosts. All but one outstanding, peculiar student, who instead of cherishing the house elf-made food, was sitting very still, legs crossed under an old wooden table, inside the tall ceilinged library on the first floor. Tom Riddle was reading, which wasn't an unexpected sight to find when one ventured into the library, especially not at that time of day. It wouldn't have been surprising to anyone if Tom had found a way to spend the entire night at the library, cozying up next to a pile of leather-bound books that had caught his eye. Yes, Tom was reading, and if it wasn't for absolute pleasure, he always had at least a purpose when glossing over countless pages of rich text. Madam Pince, the school librarian, had heard the handsome boy muttering to himself several times that morning, while she stacked the newest collection of Quidditch record books, when she found a student's lonely tabby cat curled up under the herbology and botany section, even as she made her way to the ladies' loo. She found this to be awfully unusual, but Tom wasn't one to bat an eye to his surroundings, even as the useless woman stared intently at him, which is why he remained put, so still for so many hours, reading a curiously old book. "Tom, there you are, my boy," Professor Horace Slughorn, Tom's potions professor and head of the House of Slytherin, approached the wooden table where Tom was perched over, his burgundy robes swishing behind him happily. "How come you aren't at breakfast?" Sunshine piercing through a tall, red and brown paned window made Tom's back feel slightly hot, and when he looked up at Slughorn, his deep green eyes bearing no sign of tiredness, he thought he could brush the heat off. "I must have lost track of time," Tom said, smiling charmingly while closing the book in front of him rather quickly. Slughorn looked down at the book, trying, too feebly, to catch the name of it, but Tom, thinking fast, placed a much smaller book, its raven cover intact and shiny, on top of the book that was prompting much curiosity. "Any news of what we discussed?" Slughorn asked after a pause. Tom looked up at his most beloved professor with thinking eyes, then, very quickly, pulled out a large piece of parchment from his satchel. On it, what looked like a list of names were written in fresh ink, evenly spaced. "That's all the information I could find," said Tom. "Quite disturbing, sir, but if I do say so myself, I believe that every name on this list was somehow involved in the opening of the chamber." Slughorn remained still, looking down at the list in Tom's hand. His face had at once turned from worried to relieved, the colour returning to him, making him look more alive and younger. "Merlin's beard," he said in awe. "I want to say I'm surprised, but, well..." He read the names again, one by one, mouth slightly opened. "Miss Warren, of Ravenclaw." Tom noticed his professor's hesitation, which didn't worry him in the slightest, for he had already, long before, forged the perfect plan. "Like I said, sir," Tom said, eyebrows raised. "It's quite disturbing information." Tom stood up very slowly, taking advantage of Slughorn's pause, and slipped the old book, along with his black-covered diary, into his briefcase. As Professor Slughorn cleared his throat and rolled up the parchment, Tom swung the strap of his satchel over his shoulder and accommodated his green and silver prefect badge, bearing his house colours. "Good day, Tom," Slughorn said, providing a smile. "Yes," Tom said. "I believe it will be, sir." He walked away swiftly, slightly tapping the diary inside the satchel with his hand. He had to wait until nightfall. Tom Riddle had been infamous amongst Slytherin students for being the strictest prefect of the lot, Because of this, his constant absence for the past couple of weeks had granted, or so the students had so believed, free will, especially after final exams had ended. Every corridor in the school was filled with passing students. First years running amok, fifth years flaunting their owl's examination scores, and seventh years slouching over railings out of boredom, or snogging with some fourth year under the divination tower's spiral staircase. Whatever the case was, Tom did not have the opportunity to perform the act he so brilliantly had planned, so he waited. He needed to wait. As he marched alongside students of all houses, too many mudbloods out in the open for his liking, Tom deviated from the streaming crowd headed for the final Quidditch match of the year and hid behind a statue of a hog nearing the second floor's girls' bathroom. When the coast was clear, he glided to the loo, peeking and opening up his ears to make sure there was no remaining girls inside, for this bathroom was rather popular amongst those loud beasts at this time. The rest was easy enough. Clutching his satchel, Tom made his way through and inside the many twists and turns that led to the Chamber of Secrets, walking freely along the humid tunnels. Down there, inside the chamber, he was alone at last. The most alone he was at any time while at Hogwarts. Yet, he liked it like that. Tom walked along the long bridge that led to the gigantic stone-carved face of Salazar Slytherin himself, a view Tom particularly loved due to its rich history. Once he was in a safe spot under the eyes and care of his ancestor, Tom swiped off his satchel and pulled out both the old library book titled Secrets of the Darkest Art and his beloved diary, which was filled with notes, sketches, and ideas he'd been concocting for the time he'd been at Hogwarts. "I bear my life in my hands, Master Slytherin," he said in fluent pastoral tongue, kneeling down face to face of the carved sculpture. "I shall outlive men and all men." A flash of something graced his eyes, something he couldn't explain or even understand, but it produced a feeling of warmth and, amongst all, power. Tom swallowed hard. He stood up, removed his robes, and loosened his tie, allowing a square of luminescent pale skin to be visible and accessible. Then he pulled out his wand from his pocket, gripping it very tight. He pointed it at his throat. The tip of the wand was cold and sharp, and when he muttered a silent spell, he felt an immense surge of pain take over his entire neck, yet he persisted, sustaining his wand over his flesh until he was sure he'd created a deep enough wound. Tom kneeled again, letting the blood that was seeping from his self-inflicted cut onto his diary, careful not to spill it on Secrets of the Darkest Art. He opened the diary, its pages scribbled on violently, and let the blood drip, drip, drip all over it. He gasped, for the stinging of the cut was more painful than he initially thought. Tom tried to keep his breath steady despite the cries of pain he was letting out. He had to continue. Something could be heard pumping, twisting behind him. It was something that Tom had certainly seen before, a creature with which he had had plenty of memorable interaction. When he'd first seen it, he hadn't believed its size, but after several trips down to the chamber, along with the intricate framing of several students, most, if not all, mudbloods and half-bloods, he'd gotten used to the presence of the monster. The basilisk slithered its way out of the open mouth of Salazar Slytherin, moving onto the wet stone floor and surrounding Tom. The beast was enormous in length and size, covering almost half the chamber. It sensed danger, pain, and could smell the fresh human blood Tom was so valiantly spilling. "It's all right," he said to the gigantic snake in parcel tongue, still struggling with the blood, catching it with his crimson-stained hands and spreading it all over the diary. "We both shall rejoice tonight," he said the last portion in English due to the pain he was beginning to become tired of. After all, Tom detested nothing more than feeling weak, human, at the mercy of anyone. If he could feel this pain so deeply, how could he remain in power for all existence? He couldn't stop. Not now. The diary was sufficiently coated now. It would do as such. Just seeing the book sloppy with blood, prepared for the crucial act, was enough to bring the energy back to Tom. Applying pressure to his neck, he leaned forward and reached for his satchel, which he opened to pull out a small vial and the corpse of a dead tabby kitten. He laid the kitten on the ground as he swiftly uncorked the vial and dripped its transparent, runny contents onto his wound. Phoenix tears had never been as useful as they were at that moment, and Professor Albus Dumbledore's Phoenix Forks had proved to be more than essential if Tom wanted his plan to succeed. "Filthy little creatures," he said to the basilisk as he felt the wound on his neck heal. "Uselessly immortal, providing nothing else but healing." Tom tossed the vial to one side angrily. The glass broke upon making contact with the stone ground. He then grabbed the tabby kitten. Its eyes were all white and misty, and its limbs had long given out. It would do perfectly. Tom grabbed his wand and conjured the same spell he had applied to himself on the kitten. A laceration appeared on the fur of the animal, and soon enough, its blood began dripping onto the diary, just like Tom's blood had. And so it went. Tom continued coating the diary in the kitten's blood until he was satisfied, before tossing the kitten aside and letting the basilisk take care of the body. Though he was deep down inside the ground and he couldn't tell the time of day, he calculated that nightfall had certainly fallen, and that the Quidditch match had finally ended, and that students were most likely finishing up their dinner. He knew that there was only a sliver of time before the students went to bed, and then it would be too late, too tricky to perform the act. Tom gathered his belongings, not without first checking in Secrets of the Darkest Art, to make sure he'd performed the preparation in the correct order. He closed his satchel, straightened his trousers, and put his Slytherin robes on, making sure they covered the stains of blood on his jumper underneath. Once he was out of the chamber, Tom made his way downstairs, checking at every corner to make sure there was nobody around. He skidded his way along corridors, avoiding any gaze from the people in the portraits decorating every inch of the wall of the castle. "There goes that Riddle boy again," said an inhabitant of the painting, shaking her head. "Always up to something." Tom ignored this, quickly walking by the Great Hall. There were certainly a majority of people inside. Towards the entrance of the Slytherin common room in the dungeons. When he was at the concealed stone door, Tom whispered, "Pork pie," making sure nobody else heard him come in. The stone door slid to the side to reveal the entrance, and then Tom, in a hurry, found his four-poster before stripping off his clothes and pulling on a fresh set of Hogwarts robes. In no time, Tom had strode out of the common room and made his precise way to the second floor, where he knew, because he'd tipped off Olive Hornby about the Mudblood Myrtle Warren's hideous new glasses, that he'd find both girls near the glorious loo. Tom stood very still close to the girls' bathroom, both listening for students and Hogwarts caretaker Argus Filch coming, as well as for the pair he'd set up. "Myrtle's round glasses," came the shrill voice belonging to Olive Hornby from inside the bathroom. "They make her look like a pansy covered in molasses." Tom heard Myrtle's crying, her footsteps marking her place inside a stall. He heard the door slam shut, and the girl cried, "Leave me alone," in a strained tone. Olive Hornby let out a laugh, hit the stall door a few more times, and strode out of the bathroom rather quickly. When she spotted Tom, her face grew red. "You were right," she stammered. "What a filthy little mudblood she is." Something in Tom's eyes flashed almost red, which made Olive slightly jump, but her impulses were greater. She moved forward, planted a tender kiss on Tom's cold cheek. "See you on the train," she said, and walked away briskly. Tom waited until she was out of sight, not distracted for a second by her incomprehensible actions. Then, he walked into the bathroom, which was when he heard Myrtle sobbing very loudly. After slamming the doors shut, Tom quickly took off his satchel and pulled out the diary, now covered in dried blood. He set it on one of the sinks, stood very still, and said, "Come, my beast." The floor beneath the sinks expanded, grew, stirred. A pipe had seemed to stretch out more and more, to allow something larger than life through. Silently, as it was, the basilisk had made its way through a pipe and was now pulling its head through it. Hungry. It was hungry for food. "Who is it?" said Myrtle from inside the stall. "Go away." It was far too late. The girl hadn't even fully opened the door when her body gave way, her blue eyes beneath the round glasses fixed on that of the basilisk's. Myrtle turned pale and sad, sadder than she had been, and fell to the ground, dead in an instant. Tom breathed, steady, looking straight at the girl. He didn't have any more time to waste. Tom pulled out his wand from inside his robes, and pointing it directly at Myrtle's dead body, he said, "Herpo Foeda." He had been clear in his intonation, not like he'd done with other spells, which he preferred to mutter or simply incantate in his head. It all occurred in seconds, milliseconds even. The power of the dark spell broke something inside Tom. Something, he understood, was irreparable. He felt a stirring inside him, a noise of pain, a hissing harmonizing with the basilisk at his side. He grunted, fell to the ground, and, with much struggle, moved his wand from Myrtle and pointed it at his diary on the ground. Then it was done. He'd actually done it, and it hadn't been impossible or a myth after all. Tom let out a scream. He felt his insides twisting, his skin prickling, itching, burning. Something was changing. Something about him, many things indeed, were about to see their new beginnings. Their ends. Something of him lived inside the diary now, forever. And as the basilisk slipped back into the pipes and Myrtle's body twitched slightly, Tom Riddle took a deep breath and simply smiled.